Hi, everyone. I'm John Spalding, and I'm the Director of Development and Communications at IMS, the Insight Meditation Society. And like everyone else, I have moments in my life when I am a hot mess. Just ask my teenage sons, they'd be glad to tell you all about it. Fortunately, my guests today, Devon and Craig Hase, have a lot to say about how not to be a hot mess, the title of their new wonderful book out from Shambhala Publications. This survival guide for modern life couldn't be more timely with all that's going on in the world, but it is also truly timeless and time-tested, inspired as it is by the ancient wisdom of Buddhism. Now, before I introduce my guests, I'd like to announce that IMS is offering free copies of their book. We have a monthly giving program called Sustaining the Sangha. And to join, all you have to do is go to our website, which is dharma.org. And there you select monthly giving and then this Sustaining the Sangha. That's this monthly giving program. And here it should be on your screen now. Now, all you have to do is when you sign up for Sustaining the Sangha, if you join and just give $5 per month, we will happily send you a copy of Craig and Devon's book. And if you're already a member of Sustaining the Sangha, first, thank you. You can receive a free copy simply by increasing your monthly donation by $5 per month. To do that, just email us at development@dharma.org or call 978-355-4378, extension 230, and we will send you a copy of their book. Okay, a word about my guests. Devon and Craig teach meditation workshops and retreats throughout North America and Europe. Devon serves on retreat teams here at IMS, where she is also a current participant in our 4-year teacher training program, which its first cohort finishes just next year. She also teaches at Spirit Rock, and she's a mentor in Jack Kornfield and Tara Brach's Mindfulness Meditation Teacher Certification Program, and she's a coach on the 10% Happier app. Craig holds a PhD in counseling psychology, works as a therapist and coach, and teaches on the online platform Simple Habit. When he was 19 years old, Craig, then new to meditation, sat a 5-month-long meditation retreat, which maybe we can get him to talk about shortly, because that's pretty astounding, anyone who knows teenage boys. Anyway, Devon and Craig, welcome.
Thank you so much, John. It's really such an honor to be here with you. I think we're both just delighted and really happy that this can support IMS during this time. You know, the pandemic has brought all kinds of uncertainty, and so we're really happy to do what we can to support IMS as an institution for sure.
No, thank you very much. I must say, I really do love the title of your book. I mean, it's really catchy. But I think that, How Not to Be a Hot Mess, it really speaks to the desire that drew most of us to meditation and Buddhism in the first place. It's that we really no longer want to get caught up in the strong feelings and reactivity that cause so much pain and unhappiness in our life. And so I thought maybe could each of you just share for a bit something about yourselves and what drew you to this practice? Maybe what hot messes brought you to this place?
Well, I was such a hot mess. Maybe I should go first.
You were.
Yeah, because I think the story is that, I grew up in a bookstore, which was the best and the worst part of my early life. It was the best part because my mom owned this small bookstore in a rural town in Connecticut, and I went there most days after school, and I loved being there. And I got to read whatever I wanted, very, very young. And so it was a sweet atmosphere. It was a beautiful atmosphere. Our chocolate lab wandered around the store at all times, but it didn't make any money. And it ended up going bankrupt, and, we lost our house, and my mother struggled with alcoholism. And there was just a lot of real pain and difficulty for me as a teenager, and a lot of anger for me as a teenager. And right into that knot of hot messness, Joseph Goldstein's book dropped into my lap. Insight Meditation was the first book that I ever read about meditation. And for me, that moment of reading the Dharma for the first time was like a light went off in my mind. And I just thought, this is for me. This is what I've been looking for. And so through a series of circumstances, I found myself going up to a very small meditation center in upstate New York. Went for a weekend retreat when I was 16. Then after my freshman year in college, I did a month-long retreat there. And then I took a semester off college and I did a 5-month retreat there when I was 19, like you said. And so by that time, I was completely hooked on meditation and on Dharma. And I moved into a Zen monastery. I stayed there for 6 years until Devon came along and dragged me out. That's not true. That's not really true.
Oh, he jokes that he moved out of his Zen monastery for women and money. But I don't think I was really a corrupting influence. I think
at all.
it was a good thing that I came along.
Mm-hmm.
So my story is kind of different. We joke that when Craig in high school was playing rock and roll and getting high, I was in high school playing volleyball and getting straight A's. So my upbringing here in my hometown, we're in Ashland, Oregon right now, just over the California border. And I grew up in a really safe, protected environment. As an only child, my parents were really, they were a little older when I was born. So they had established careers and were really wonderful parents. They had wanted a child for a long time. And so I was really like the kind of the all around wholesome, high school valedictorian. And while from the outside, there's a lot of really wonderful, wholesome things there, I had internalized a whole lot of pressure. So being in a small town with not a lot of diversity, there was just a lot of pressure to perform, to succeed, to use all the resources that I had to get somewhere in the world. And I had really bought into that cultural narrative around success looking a certain way. So by the time I got to college, totally overachiever, really overcommitted, kind of wore myself to the ground, especially around like needing my body to really be like this perfect athletic kind of body. So I was on the crew team and I was rowing quite a lot in the lightweight crew. And sophomore year and Christmas break, I came home to my beautiful, safe shire of the small town and kind of had a breakdown, melted down on the kitchen floor, telling my mom about some of the disordered eating and overexercise I was doing. And she, really good mom, she gave me a book. And the book she gave me was by Pema Chodron, and it was called When Things Fall Apart, which I think is pretty apropos for this time right now in history as well. But for me, back then, and as a sophomore in college, it was completely just the perfect thing. It felt like I was reading common sense that I sort of already knew, but I needed to be reminded. And really from that moment, I was dedicated. I started meditating at home and really knew I wanted to make my life about meditation, actually. So that was my beginning.
Somehow I think that we've just mentioned 3 Shambhala titles in like the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I think we did.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Those are all Shambhala books.
Go Shambhala.
And Devon, I wanted to ask you, I read in the book, just curious, your father worked with Carl Rogers, the famous 20th century psychologist, and can you talk a little bit about that? Just curious.
Totally. My dad, in some ways, his story is the most interesting of all. He grew up in the Midwest in a very large Catholic family. He was the second of 9 children. And when he was 13, told his parents that he was going to go into the monastery. So he was a very devout young man and really just unswervingly went to the monastery and became ordained as a Catholic monk, and stayed there for 20 years. So went all through catechism, his whole education in the monastery, in his 20s and 30s was performing all these weddings and hearing confessions, being a Catholic priest. And at a certain point in the 70s, got really disillusioned. There was, I think, a very conservative pope at the time who came down really hard against birth control. And so he was hearing these confessions of partners who were using birth control, and his role was to tell them they couldn't. They had to have kids that they couldn't afford, etc. And I think that really started him questioning the whole thing, the whole institution of Catholicism. And so ended in his he was 35, I think, when he ended up leaving. And then in some ways just, he didn't go wild, but he certainly started dating at age 35. Had a lot of girlfriends all at once, is the story I'm told. And they were all part of the Center for the Studies of the Person, which was Carl Rogers' main center down there in Southern California, Claremont colleges. So he was doing therapy, he was doing encounter groups, he was running weekend workshops for single people. And one of these, he was the workshop leader. My mother was 13 years younger and came to meet someone one of these weekends for single people. And my mom was the one who was like, I like him. I like the leader of this workshop. And so she, I think at the end, said something to him, and he had no clue. He was totally clueless. But they ended up dating and having me. But by then, my dad was 50. So he had this whole other life as a Catholic priest and then a therapist at Claremont colleges with the Carl Rogers crew before they moved up here to Ashland and I was born.
So you were born into unconditional positive regard.
Basically, it's really true. Yeah, my dad brought a lot of that contemplative life with him, as a father. So we would philosophize over the breakfast table. He's the one who taught me to meditate, actually. In college, that was the time it really caught me. But when I was 8 or 9, I remember my dad saying, it's important to meditate. It's a good thing to do. You kind of imagine your mind like an empty room. And he gave me this sort of, I don't know where they came from, random meditation instructions. But a lot of that contemplative life that he brought from the monastery was imbued in my early childhood.
Oh, sure. That's really beautiful. And then just switching over to your book, you have a really great story at the beginning of the book, the story of the Buddha. And it really is a great story about how best to navigate in the midst of these storms and chaos. And it's the Buddha's story about, the moments prior to his achieving full awakening. Craig, do you want to tell us about that?
Tell us about that story? Yeah. Well, I think a lot of IMS folks know this story where the Buddha, who's not yet the Buddha, he's this young man who's been traveling through India, studying with the greats, the masters of his time, but still never satisfied because he wanted to have unconditional awakening, and he thought his teachers didn't have that. So he travels and studies for 6 years, and finally he sits down under this beautiful tree and says he's not going to move until he fully awakens. And then in that moment, the demon Mara, who kind of symbolizes obfuscation and, delusion, attacks the Buddha with all of these different sort of like what I think of as hallucinations, but these like armies of demons, and then these temptresses that try to come and knock him off his seat and take him off his game. And what the Buddha does in that moment is that he first comes back to his goodness. He thinks back. Mara says to him, "Who are you? Who are you to be sitting on this hallowed seat? Who are you to be awakened?" And the Buddha comes back to his goodness, and he thinks about all of the wholesome activities that he has engaged in. He thinks of all of the wholesome thoughts that he has had. He thinks of all of the meditation that he has done. And he says, the earth is my witness. So that's the way that we frame this entire book, is it is a maelstrom out there of crazy, of information and misinformation and 24-hour news cycle and trauma porn and all of the rest of it. how do we stay steady in the midst of this? And the very simple answer is that we can do something moment to moment, a lot like what the Buddha did. We can kind of put our hand on the earth symbolically. We can come back to ourselves and what really matters to me today. What are my values? What are my ethics? What's important to me? And then we can act from that place. And so all the chapters of the book come out of that initial story.
Mm. Yeah, and then the book, the way it's structured, it follows the 5 precepts of Buddhism and also their associated virtues, right? Generosity, and which we can get to. But then on the first chapter is really it's about meditation, which I guess is one way of kind of putting your hand on the earth. Devon, so want to talk a bit about mindfulness and meditation for those who don't know a whole lot about it and how it figures into this book?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that this chapter in a lot of ways was born through our work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So at the time that this idea was just this little seedling in our minds, we were both involved with the Center for Healthy Minds, which is run by Dr. Richie Davidson. He is the head neuroscience, looking at how mindfulness and meditation can really affect the brain. And so we were teaching for some of his studies. And of course, we love meditation. We're all about meditation all the time. But seeing how it's actually really being proven to be beneficial in these very concrete ways was incredibly convincing for the undergrad students we were working with, for the wider populations of folks in the hospitals and the clinics where we were teaching. So this chapter is really, we wanted to name just some of the studies that are really showing pretty solid evidence that mindfulness can help in direct ways. It increases focus and it decreases stress. And the third category that we name, we say it helps you become a better human, which is just kind of a colloquial way of saying that it can grow our compassion. And so we cite the study by Helen Wang, who was working at the Center for Healthy Minds at the time. She did this amazing compassion study, looking at how doing just an 8-week compassion course actually increases altruism in the moment. Like, people act differently. They're more generous. They're more willing to give up their seat for someone in crutches if they've done this compassion training. Mm-hmm. So some of those studies were so compelling for us that we, in this first chapter, talk about how to do meditation, how important it has been for us. But also, these are the studies that are showing, without a doubt, it really has lasting benefit for folks.
Yeah, and you've got a sidebar in there too. It's actually called, on top of all the other benefits, that mindfulness can dismantle white supremacy, which there's a ray of hope. You want to talk about how that works?
Yeah, sure. I can start. You might want to jump in on this one. Mm-hmm. In that sidebar, I really tell the story of my experience in the Community Dharma Leaders program, which is the 4th iteration. So I joined in 2010. And at that time, I was 30, I guess, and still pretty naive in terms of understanding white supremacy and how it works in our own hearts and minds, in our wider communities. And it was this amazing moment for me to see how I had just been living off in the mountains in retreat and doing a lot of solitary practice. And my real question was, how do I bring this into the world? How does this have effect in my day-to-day life? And learning from my dear siblings and friends in the Community Dharma Leaders program how doing mindfulness and meditation actually helps confront these unconscious patterns and the ways that I'm harming without even knowing it, and the ways that white supremacy and hatred and greed and ignorance are kind of hiding out in the corners of my own heart and mind. And doing collective practice, I could actually start to wake up to those patterns and start to see them first here in this system, but then understanding, how they function on an organizational, institutional, societal level as well. So it really felt like, no, these are not two different things, that waking up means waking up to everything. and that injustice and the harm that's being caused in our wider systems is certainly really important to wake up to. And then if we're committed to the first precept, what can we do to remedy some of that harm?
Mhm.
So that's the story in the sidebar, but you have a lot to say about this piece as well, I know.
I think that one thing I will say about this piece is that it is hard work on whatever level you do it, and whatever in whatever way you are racialized. So being racialized white, I think there is a lot of hard work to be done about acknowledging the harm that just my identity can cause, the ways that I'm privileged unfairly, and being able to take that in and feel that requires some level of support. I think it requires communal support. I think we need to be in communities when we do this work. I think it also requires the support that mindfulness can provide. So this ability to be with discomfort and pain and shame, maybe for a white person, is really essential when we're dealing with what we've come to call white fragility, which is the reactivity of white people when they're confronted with these issues. And then I just know from speaking to my friends of color, I won't speak for them, but they have many times said that mindfulness also helps them stay in the game and see clearly and know what's happening and not shy away and take action and all these other pieces. So whichever way that you're positioned culturally, I think mindfulness can be very helpful in dismantling white supremacy.
Mm. Yeah, and it just, something you said there made me think too of this line that, when we think of mindfulness and all of the wonderful benefits, you make this point that, mindfulness is not enough. And that's really what I guess the rest of the book is about. We hear about the benefits of mindfulness, Do you want to just comment on that and why the precepts?
Yeah, maybe I'll start it off. So just like Devon said, we love mindfulness. We're huge fans. And I'm somebody who loves mindfulness in Buddhist context and also loves secular mindfulness. It's just not enough, though, to deal with the big crazy that is our world right now. Everything has spun so far off its axis. Everything feels so out of control. And this was true pre-COVID. Now it's 10 times as true. Mindfulness can help us stabilize a little bit. But we're also going to need, like I said earlier, we're going to need some basic principles, some guiding ways of being that are going to help us make the tough choices that we have to make moment to moment in our days. So yes, mindfulness, but also, like when we go through the chapters, don't be a jerk, right? Give a little, say what's true, make sex good, stay clear. These basic principles that we can use as frames of reference for all of the situations that we find ourselves in our life. So that's what I would say to start.
Yeah, it's good. Mindfulness alone is not enough. We have to give our bows to Sayadaw U Tejaniya, who also has a book by that title. This sense that in the teachings, mindfulness isn't alone. Yeah. Samasati, wise mindfulness, comes along with this whole host of other eightfold path factors. And also there's the encouragement to practice sati sampajanya, mindfulness and clear knowing, clear understanding. And so while we both are really involved in more mainstream organizations that are teaching mindfulness outside of a Dharma context, we, I think, really wanted to speak to some of those communities and put mindfulness in a wider context that also includes values and guidelines. Because the concern is if it's just extracted without that context, without any kind of education around the precepts, it's maybe not so much wise sati, samasati, wise mindfulness anymore. So that was a lot of our attempt, was to write about these precepts in a way that's really accessible, totally common sense, doesn't have to be Buddhist, right? Very much like anybody could think about these ideas around generosity and clarity and honesty. But for me, teaching in all these different contexts, I really wanted to have a frame to be able to offer not just the practice of meditation, but also understanding mindfulness includes looking at your life and looking at how you're living and how you're reacting. And especially working with young folks, they're inheriting such a world. You know, even just this week, I'm aware of my own, like I'm holding so much emotion, and also collectively, I think we are, with the events in Minneapolis with George Floyd's death and the way our country is reacting to it. You know, I think these values, these guidelines become even more paramount for even staying steady in our own boat, our own heart, you know, with how do we hold some of this really just horrific news, and find a kind of refuge and resource for then knowing how to act in the world. Then how can we actually be skillful in our response? So I think it takes these kind of contemplative practices more than just sitting still with our breath in the world that we're in, that's so complex.
Yeah. And Craig, you mentioned that the first precept, as you have reframed it as "don't be a jerk."
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward message there. I think you
I
boiled
like to
it
be straightforward.
is whatever causes harm to another is.
Yeah. So that the first chapter of the book is meditate. That's like our first piece of good advice. The second chapter of the book is don't be a jerk. And the way that I define being a jerk in that chapter is, like you said, causing harm. And then I give a whole lot of research-based reasons and personal stories for why it's probably a good idea not to cause harm. And then I go into what could we do instead? Like, instead of being a jerk, instead of causing harm, we could cultivate kindness. You know, we could cultivate nourishing relationships. And that leads into the next chapter.
Yeah. And one of the things I loved in there was was it Shanti Deva's expression, "Be like a block of wood."
Yeah.
As a mantra, but something to do when you're feeling reactivity.
Reactivity.
You want to talk about?
Yeah, so I talk about, so Shanti Deva, background on Shanti Deva. He's I think 10th century, maybe, long time ago, Mahayana Buddhist philosopher who spoke a lot about ethics and also the very deepest aspects of Buddhist philosophy, like emptiness. He said, if you're feeling reactive, if you might do something that you later regret, the first step is to remain like a block of wood. In other words, just for that moment, don't do anything. Don't say anything. Just hang out. And then what I always like to point out is that you're a living block of wood, right? So this is not a bypass, and this is not repression. This is like, I'm hanging out with this incredible discomfort of wanting to act, knowing that it's unskillful, like, right? Knowing these words I'm about to say are unskillful, that they might lead to harm, that they're gonna make my life so much more difficult for the next 4 hours. It's just me. I could remain like a block of wood and sit with that difficulty instead of act it out habitually.
And just as a note, I watch him do this all the time. So I can tell when he's he's self-editing. So the example we give in the book, which is pretty true to life, is that we have very different driving styles. He learned how to drive in New York City. I learned how to drive in rural Oregon. So when I'm driving, often Craig has, well, I don't want to speak for you, but I have the sense that there might be things that you would say about my driving style.
I might have an unnecessary piece of advice.
And I can feel him practicing with this guideline. It's actually, I'll say it from the other end, it's really nice to know that he's sort of holding his own response without it spilling into my experience. And I can feel that sense of, there's a discipline to it, I think. So just to say, like, this particular practice, I think, can benefit those around us as well when we're kind of taking responsibility for our own reactivity before we act.
Yeah. And in that chapter too, you talk, I think, pretty articulately and clearly on how, it's about, trying not to say things that can be of harm to others, and that don't be a jerk. But then there are times when not saying something can cause harm too.
Yeah,
It's the matter of knowing the difference. All right.
that's right. That's right. And the example that we give in the book is actually an example from Dr. Bonnie Duran, who's a teacher at IMS, sending me a pretty strongly worded email when I had done something that just wasn't sitting right with her. I'd written a blog. It had some overtones of cultural appropriation, patriarchy, um, yeah, harm to indigenous folks. There's like all this stuff that was built into this blog. From my part, it had been unconsciously. And she didn't remain like a block of wood and not say anything. She sent me this email that was super clear and direct, saying, hey, here's what I'm seeing. You should look at this. And for my part, I really appreciated that. Like, yeah, okay. That I got off track there. That was not the right thing. So.
And it was also really kind.
Yeah.
That email was totally, like, completely coming from a really kind approach, kindly worded. You could feel it. And I think that was the example we use, is like this kind of speech can be really direct and clear, fierce even, but you can do it in a kind way. That we're kind of getting into the speech precept here, but there is definitely like a way to speak truth to power that's kind and also fierce. That was our example. Yeah. Bonnie continues to be a role model for me too.
That's right. And when you do something like that, you don't know quite what the impact will be on, but she knows you, so she has a probably some sense for how best to communicate it to you. But in some cases, we just don't know the effect. But I guess we can just do our best and to be as clear with ourselves about what our intentions are and how skillfully we execute, I guess. Yeah. Well, the next chapter there I love is called Give a Little, which Devon, and I should mention that the chapters in the book are, one of the really nice elements of it is you each have a chapter that's kind of your voice, and together they work together, so they go together so well. You would think that two people writing a book together, it might be, it seems like it was easy. Anyway, we can talk about that later. Let's talk about generosity. There's Devon, you write in there, but that generosity is the very foundation of a decent life. And that does not sound like one of our top cultural values today.
Not so much today. It was really fun to write that chapter because it is so true. When we actually start to look at it in our own lives and notice how it feels to give. And that's actually in the chapter I sort of outline a generosity meditation we can do, where we contemplate giving that we've done in the past, think about doing something in the future, and then actually give a gift. And how that it's so uplifting, actually. And, generosity, we can feel small-minded and scared often too. It's not just always like open-hearted, completely warm, giving generosity all the time. So it's a practice, but quite uplifting to look at how happy we get when we actually give. And there's research, again, in that chapter, we cite how happy people get when they actually give. There's a study where undergrads were invited to either spend $20 on themselves or $20 on somebody else. And the folks who give their money away just get so happy. And they're like, now I'm going to go spend more money on my roommates and my friends, my housemates. So I've loved writing that piece because although it might not be like the knee-jerk reaction that we have, and maybe it's not instilled in us in our cultural values, when we actually do give in that sort of open-handed way, it just is so refreshing. It can really click us out of whatever difficulty we're in the moment. So it's kind of a superpower, I think.
Yeah. And I just love Joseph Goldstein's teaching on generosity. He tells that story about at one point he got this idea that he would do as like an experiment, that whenever he had the impulse to give to someone or to help someone out, just do it before he would allow his mind the opportunity to talk himself out of it. And he says that, he's never regretted that. And it's actually, it is a really fun practice. I think the first time I said that, I'm going to think about that for a second, and then like, but it's a great practice. Yeah.
Can I just place a footnote on that?
Yeah.
Joseph is not married. So because I do that practice,
he does.
and Devon does that practice too, but I have done that practice in ways that are very significant and without talking to my partner first. Like one time I paid a friend's rent without talking to my partner.
I was on retreat. I was away. And then I came home and he was like, by the way, it's actually such an interesting practice to work with your partner's generosity.
Because we were so broke. We had no money. I was a grad student.
Yeah, but I feel like also that highlighted for me, all kinds of things, comparing mind, my own fear of scarcity, my own sense of like, I would never do that, like I got to look at all the ways that I actually was kind of feeling small and tight as well. So over time, I came to see that it was wise, but it certainly does affect your partner if you're practicing in that radical way. That
the only thing that I wanted to say is it's good to be in your context, and especially to check with your beloved life partner before giving away large sums of money.
Or just be single like Joseph.
Or just, I think,
Joseph's onto something.
He's
got a pretty good life.
A good life.
Yeah. And then that just moves us on to Say What's True. That's the 4th chapter. And Craig, you mentioned in there's a survey that you cite that kind of shows the difference between how much people think they're telling the truth and how much they actually aren't. Do you recall that? It's a little surprising. We kind of think more highly of ourselves.
Right. So, there's a difference between survey-based research and observation-based research. So it's one of the main distinctions that you make in especially psychological research. If you ask people, how often do you lie? I don't remember the exact numbers right now, but they'll say, I lie about this many times a day, and it's a very small number of times. But if you get a group of people together in the lab on a task that requires them to tell the truth and then observe, then they'll lie multiple times, even within that 10 or 15 minute task. And to me, I think anyone who has sat down to meditate for long enough will start to recognize some of their shadiness. I think that's an important part of the meditative journey is to notice, oh, wow, I'm actually not as upright as I kind of thought that I was. And look at these mean-spirited thoughts that I have sometimes. And oh my gosh, there's that time that I really lied. And I'll say it's also important to recognize the universality of that experience. It's not that you are a bad person for recognizing these things. In fact, it's part of what makes you a really good person that you're recognizing these things. So it can be very uplifting. There's another Joseph-ism, is that it's so much better to recognize the defilements than not to, because then we can make choices about what we do and what we say.
Yeah, and I did find it, so it's only 40% of respondents admit they've lied in the last 24 hours, but then the observation side was that 2/3 of the people observed can't go 10 minutes without telling a lie.
Whoa, that's intense.
Let's see, you tell a really great story in there. Wondering if I want to just get into that. The Lama Rinchen.
Oh.
I think it's in that chapter, which I just love that chapter. But is there something, Craig, if you think it's appropriate to tell that story, like if it fits into, or if you want to say more about the principles behind saying what's true, being honest, maybe start there, and then if you feel you want to tell that story.
Sure. So we break it down, there's like the what not to in that chapter. And then very quickly we move into, okay, how to. And then there's these 4 principles that we all talk about in Dharma communities, which is what I am about to say true? Is it helpful? Is it timely? And is it kind? So true is one part. And I talk a lot about in that chapter about my own journey around just being authentic without a lot of wisdom. But true is number 1. It's what I'm about to say true. Really helpful to know that. And then the other 3 are just as important. Is this the right time to say this? You know, does this have a warm-heartedness to it? You know, and might it be helpful to this other person? Is there a reason that I need to say this right now? Could it be helpful to this person? And then the Lama Rinchen story is that we studied with a really beloved older teacher. He was 88 last year when we were in Hawaii with him, so he's probably 89 now, full of life and quite a master, I would say, of meditation. Just very even keel kindness all the time, soft-spoken, very, very humble. Trained with some of the great masters of the 20th century in Tibet before leaving Tibet during the communist invasion. So he's just the sweetest, kindest person. And one day, on an early Sunday when we were all practicing meditation together, we came to the end of the meditation practice that we were doing, and then he opened up the room for questions. It's a small group that comes there, maybe 20 people. And somebody asked a very high-level Buddhist question about the unborn nature of the mind, which in Vajrayana Buddhism is like, it's an incredibly subtle experiential point with a whole lot of philosophical underpinnings, and it's like an expensive question, right? So Lama Rinchen paused, because he's very considered and very slow. And as he paused, another student in the audience piped up and began to give this textually informed answer. Just really talking with maybe some pride, maybe some, we might even call it arrogance, you know, and Lama Rinchen kind of let him go. And then this guy's name, I call him William in the book, that's a pseudonym. So then William paused, and then Lama Rinchen started to give an answer. And Lama Rinchen was speaking in his very slow, very considered, very kind, quiet way, just giving like the most unbelievably refined answer to this high-level question that was all based in philosophical text, but shot through with his own very, very personal, years-long, decades-long meditation experience, including spending years in meditation retreat. And then he paused. And this guy, William, jumped in and interrupted him and started mouthing off again. Lama Rinchen had a chance to speak a 3rd time. And this time, William interrupted him and corrected him, which was pretty surprising. Like the whole room was, oh my gosh. We've got some sirens going by. So the whole room was, whoa. And Lama Rinchen, he didn't get angry. He didn't seem the least bit reactive, but he just said it to William exactly as he saw it. He said to him, "You know nothing about the Dharma. Nothing. It's all books for you. All the books, words, you've read all the books, but the Dharma is in the heart, you know? And here you are talking, and you've talked yourself into all these messes." And he went into details. He's known this guy for 20 years about all the messes this William is talking himself into. And he just laid it out, you know, like fully, clearly, honestly, calmly. And so in the book I talk about, so William stormed out of the room. He was very reactive, very angry. And I talk about in the book, it's interesting because if I look at Lama Rinchen's intentions, I would say, was it true? Definitely. Was it kind? yes, it was kind. It was an attempt to really get through to this person who is suffering and who needs a breakthrough into a different kind of experience. Was it timely? Definitely, because he was totally throwing off the whole teaching. And then was it helpful? It was really intended to be helpful.
Mm.
And I think the rest is up to us. So that's something, I think that story encapsulates like how a master responds in being not reactive, but very clear.
It takes a lot of skill to do and to
I
really.
don't know that I could do that.
A lot of skill. It's true.
Wow. Okay, I think we have, I'm not sure because we got started a little bit later, but let's talk about the next chapter of the book, Make Sex Good. Devon, you characterize this section of the book as a guide to taking back your body so that you can truly connect with your partner and find your own way into the good sex you've always wanted or used to have and would like to get back. Can you unpack that? And how?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this chapter. I'll say it's definitely the hardest chapter to write. And in the book, while we trade voices, we trade chapters, we both, of course, had influence in all of these chapters. So we both edited, we both had input. And certainly this chapter, was a challenge. But I knew that I had a lot of sort of bigger cultural ideas I wanted to unpack. So I talk about patriarchy and how it's affected my own self-identity and sexual identity. And I talk about objectification, the way that our dominant cultures objectify human bodies so that there's something to consume, something to get and obtain and possess. And then I talk about consumerism, that sense of like buying and selling and having this body be kind of a commodity. So that, to me, somehow unpacking those structures and understanding how they were functioning in my own suffering around sex and sexuality was such a healing process, actually, to see, oh, this is not personal. These are systemic influences that a lot of people are living with and through. And so the value that I really talk about for me, finding my own identity with my body, is about kind of taking my body back from those systems of oppression and discovering what it is, which in meditation, I think is such a beautiful discovery. What is happening moment by moment in this very alive, very mysterious and unpredictable situation that we have here. And so it can certainly be expressed through sex and sexuality. And I think that's such a beautiful practice for connection and intimacy. But I also talk about in the book, like asexuality is a really wonderful way to be. And we can be completely erotic, sensual beings, actually, just being alive in the world, having a good cup of tea. And when we lived in Hawaii, the ocean was like my love affair, So the sense of waking up to this aliveness, which I think is very much what the Dharma invites us to do. So I didn't really have much of a grasp of these concepts, like a lot of feeling of being separate from my body and sort of trying to perform in ways that were like pleasing to others, until I went on my first really long solitary retreat. So this was, I think, 7 years ago. I spent 6 months alone in a cabin just up in the mountains here nearby in Oregon. And that retreat for me was pretty awful, so terribly hard. I was lonely for 6 months and suffering with all kinds of other self-criticism and a lot of just harsh self-talk. So those 6 months had to be about compassion for me. And I really learned by being so alone and so silent, just with nature around me, how to take back my body in a really compassionate, connected way. And after that retreat, of course, I'm still definitely in that process and learning all the time, but that was a pivot point for me where I could see, oh, this body is nature, it's natural, it's not mine, and I can hold its experience with a really soft kind of curiosity that feels based in compassion rather than judgment.
Yeah, and you advise doing a lot of things in that chapter that could apply probably in some of the other chapters that are just that are just common sense ways of just relating more authentically. It's things like unplug, slow down, let your body be the guide, you know? And I think that just speaks to the kind of the organic nature of the practice, that things overlap, and we see common elements in you know, in all of these different practices. They sort of flow together. And I think, like in the final chapter, Stay Clear, really that ties it all up together really well, I think, right?
Yeah.
You know, Craig, that's yours. And of course, Staying Clear, our tradition at IMS is Vipassana meditation, which is insight meditation, all about seeing clearly.
Yeah.
And you talk about things not to do in order to stay clear, as well as the things to do. If you'd like to talk about them a bit.
Sure. I think what not to do is go get wasted. You know, it's like a really good idea to not drink so much alcohol that you lose track of yourself and do things that would be considered heedless, that you regret, that cloud your mind, to cloud your judgment. Also, just working with substances in ways that cloud your mind over time. You know, like I don't really get into like you shouldn't do these things, but more like when you really pay attention to what's happening in your heart and mind long term. If you're smoking weed every day, I used to smoke weed. I talk about that in the book, the way that I had this kind of love affair with substances. I thought they were great. I thought they were wonderful. As a teenager, I was all in on substances. But if you look closely at what's happening, it's kind of a fake relaxation. It's more of a dullness than anything else. And that what happens through meditation and daily mindfulness practice, life practice, is that we fall in love with vividness. You know, we fall in love with clarity and aliveness. And at some point, it starts to feel like, well, these things are getting in the way of that aliveness. And so what should we do? Then we go into all these pieces around seclusion. You know, like maybe we go into a week-long retreat if we can. A lot of us can't, especially right now. We can't go to IMS right now. What do? We take moments of seclusion. Maybe we do a 5-minute meditation where we really allow ourselves to come back to this living body that Devon was just talking about. Unhook, unplug, and arrive here. And that's a kind of clarity. We also stay clear with all the other chapters of the book. So it's things like staying clear on what we're about. What's important to me? What are my values? How do I want to act in the world? What makes me feel the most alive and connected and inspired? Staying clear on those things so that we can live the life that we feel good about, the life that we want to live.
And could you offer some, the book is full of great practices. Maybe give, if you each want to give an example of maybe one of your favorite practices from the book, or just one that you think, given everything that we talked about, that people could do at home.
I want to do one.
Great.
This is called the One Breath Meditation. And you will notice that I am not entering a meditative posture right now. So, one breath meditation. Whatever posture you're in right now, and if you're watching this on Facebook, you can do this too. You just start to feel your body, however you are. You could close your eyes or not close your eyes. And then take one deep breath in. Really feel it as you let it out. And that is the one breath meditation. I love that one.
It's a good one. He does it a lot. I can hear him all throughout the day.
Man, I need it.
Does he sometimes do the block of wood the same time he's doing the one?
Yes. Yes. Those two go well together.
You can mix and match.
Yeah.
Well,
Other meditations we do?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
I might just mention that when we worked at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a lot of what Richie's doing in his lab is analytical meditation. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit more active form. I think in the Theravada, it might fit under the category of investigation as an awakening factor. this really like looking directly at one value or one aspect of our life and really sort of unpacking it. So we have several meditations that are more like contemplations, where we take up generosity as a topic, or we take up honesty as a topic, and really sort of look at it. We do that with sexuality too. Like, how is the body? What is my sexuality expressing? How is it? So these more active forms of analysis or contemplation, I think, can really be, they're a good complement to the more samadhi-based or calm-based focusing practices that we learn in formal meditation.
Good. Well, let's see. We had kind of technical difficulties when we started, and we started a little bit late. Let me just check in with Albert, who's helping us. Albert, do we have any questions? Hey, there's Albert.
Hey, John. Hi, Devon and Craig. Yeah, we have a few questions. I'm happy to share some of those.
Sure.
Yeah, so one question from Kenzie. Would love to hear some advice on concentration at this time. My practice feels mostly scattered and anxious in quarantine.
Mhm.
Okay. Hi, Kenzie. Thank you for the question. Yeah, focus. It's a really good question. Lots of people I'm talking to these days can't really even sit down for a minute and feel their breath. A lot of rumination, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of anxiety happening. So I'll just speak for myself. I'm doing a lot of exercise, coming down from the head, the thinking head, into the feeling body, and really utilizing mindful movement. So like this morning, I woke up really early, I couldn't sleep, and I just went and did some yin yoga, really gentle yoga, feeling my breath in my body, but stretching. So rather than sort of sitting formal, doing formal breath meditation, for example, using your body, I think, can really help with some of the distraction and uncertainty. If you can get outside into the trees, that also kind of taking refuge in the water and the trees, if you do have like green around you, can be really, really helpful just for kind of to soothing some of those anxious thoughts. Mm-hmm. The third one that I think of is community. So just finding solidarity, and this is a really common collective experience. So connecting with those who can support and share your experience, I think, is a really important aspect of Sangha. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I've told Albert, like, since the pandemic really took hold, just my being able to I get up early in the morning and get out into the woods, and it makes all the difference in my day.
That's right.
It is just it's so kind of grounding and feel connected, and there aren't that many people, nobody out there really at that time in the morning.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, that's feeling like a necessity to get outside moving every day. Absolutely.
Yeah. Albert, do we have time for one or two more maybe? And Devon and Craig, do you have time for? Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have a question from James. Can you suggest retreat ideas for couples?
Oh.
You guys are doing a long retreat together.
Well, interestingly, Devon and I have been in retreat together since January. So we started a 3-month retreat, a home-based, semi-cloistered retreat together. Mid-January. It was supposed to go till mid-April. And then we were supposed to go on a 5-month book tour that was going to take us all over the United States and Canada. There were like 40 events set up. We were going to be at IMS in person. We were going to be so many places in person. All of that got canceled. So we have now been in semi-cloistered retreat for 5 months? Something like 5 months, a little more. And so I can say one way to do retreat as a couple is at home. Be a little difficult, I think, if you had children. So you have to adapt this to your own particular life and your own particular circumstances. But what we do in terms of home retreat is we wake up early. We usually do meditation until breakfast. Then we have a silent breakfast together. it's about a half-hour break for breakfast. Then we meditate until about 11 o'clock in the morning. And we both work from home as meditation teachers and mentors. So then about 11 o'clock in the morning, usually we start to get on our computers and get organized for the day. We have lunch, and then we work together all afternoon, together and separately. And then at around 6 o'clock, we meditate again until bedtime. And so in that way, we're maybe meditating something like 30 hours a week. We're maybe working something like 30 hours a week. And that's almost, besides exercise, I think that's almost all that we're doing is either meditating or working. And it's been very doable for us, you know, in terms of what we like and how we feel alive. It's been very, very helpful. Now, once retreat centers open up, there will be a whole host of ways that you can do retreat together as a couple. So Devon and I have done a lot of retreat centers. Like we've gone to the Forest Refuge together, which is one of the retreat centers at the Insight Meditation Society. Or we've just rented a cabin together and done full retreat in a cabin. So there's many, many different ways to do retreats. I can't recommend a particular couples retreat right now because they're not really happening right now. But there's lots of stuff out there. And if you ever want to talk to us about this in more detail, you can just find us online, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have about how to do this.
Maybe we could do an IMS online couples retreat with you two.
Okay. Yes.
Love it. So great.
Just keep talking. Albert, just keep recording.
It's good.
That sounds, yeah, it actually sounds really great. Okay, well, I think we've definitely been an hour. I want to say again, How Not to Be a Hot Mess is the book, subtitle. There we go. Survival Guide for Modern Life. And as I said earlier, you can get a free copy from IMS if you join our monthly giving program. It's called Sustaining the Sangha. Albert probably has a screen he'll show in a moment. To join, all you have to do is go to our website, dharma.org, select monthly giving, and then Sustaining the Sangha. And if you join and give just $5 per month, we will send you the book for free. And if you're already a member, you can receive a free copy simply by increasing your monthly donation by $5 per month. To do so, just email development@dharma.org or call 978-355-4378, extension 230, and we will send you a free copy of this really wonderful book. So I would like to thank my guests, Craig and Devon Hase. Thank you so much for writing this great book and for taking time today to join us to talk about it. And thank you, Albert, for helping us out.
Yeah, John and Albert, wow, we're so grateful. And just a word for IMS, it's such a beacon in this world. You know, a friend of mine calls it a hospital for the heart.
Yeah.
So during this time, we really want to just support and sustain as much as we can. We hope that IMS will make it through these times, these very difficult, uncertain times. So thank you for all that you're doing there and all the ways that you're serving the Dharma. We're very grateful for all that you offer the world. Yeah. Well,
thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It kind of hurts the heart to think of our meditation halls, our 2 centers empty. But we do have IMS Online, which we've got some really great programs there that I recommend people checking out. And then what's your website address?
Yeah, so we love talking to people. So if folks have meditation questions or want some kind of mentoring practice, both of us are offering Dharma mentoring one-on-one. And you can find us at Devon and Craig Hase, Hase, or Hase is the German pronunciation. So devonandcraighase.com is our website.
Great. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
Yum.
Can't wait to see you back in Barre, Massachusetts, hopefully before too long.
Hopefully soon.
Thank you. We can't wait.
Thanks.
Bye, you guys. Bye.